Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to watch this week's 90-Day Fiancé episode. Let's watch it. I'm going to get into it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. And as I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement or this channel as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
I'm not excusing Charlie's behavior because it's inexcusable. However, moving forward, I do feel that you guys need to make amends with each other, bury the hatchet, and move on, because it's inevitable that you guys are going to work together at some point.
Okay, so as I will sometimes do on this reaction video series, I will provide an alternative approach to the communication from someone on the show. And so in this moment, we have Libby, or Elizabeth, is in a position where I think if she were to articulate where she's coming from, she is seeing that her husband is angry at her brother. And she, on one hand, agrees with her husband and says, yes, you have every right to be angry because of what my brother said during our wedding in Moldova. He was doing things completely inexcusable, even to Charlie himself. The brother said it was inexcusable. Well, that's not the word he used, but something along those lines during the tell-all last season. So on one hand, the wife, Elizabeth, Libby, wants to say, I agree with you, and I'm on your side on that. But she has another side to it, that she is worried that if Andrei doesn't bury the hatchet somehow and move forward, that he is going to jeopardize his potential employment opportunities with the family. And of course, Elizabeth is thinking that that's good financially for the family. It's also good for my husband to have a success in life. It's also kind of good for the family to be one big happy family working together. So I'm guessing for Libby, she is thinking about all those things. On one hand, I want to support my husband in his anger because it's justified. I'm angry at my brother for saying that. On the other hand, I kind of want things to work out. So how do you communicate it? Well, the way that Libby decided to was, on the scale of things, pretty good compared to other people on the show. She says, yes, you're right to be angry. What my brother did was inexcusable. However, I think she wanted to say but she wanted to avoid that word. Either way, she says, however, if you're going to work things out with him, or she didn't even say that. What she said was, however, I think you need to work things out with him, because if things are going to work out business-wise, you have to get along with him. Well, okay, so let me say a different way of saying that. That usually goes over better given the way people's emotions are. You say to Andrei, you say, you're right. What my brother did was inexcusable. It was ridiculous. Even he thinks it's ridiculous. I'm just as angry as you. End of story. And then you just let it sit. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You just let that be. That's where your husband is at emotionally, and that's what he needs. He doesn't need a but. He doesn't need a however. In fact, you could just end it right there. And that might facilitate what you're really hoping for, Libby, is that he will make up with Charlie. Because sometimes when people don't feel validated with their emotions, they intensify and they feel like they have to justify themselves to everyone. If you justify his emotion and you validate, which he deserves, then maybe he will be able to calm down and see the bigger picture, which is to get along with the family. But if you had to follow it up, you could later, and this is always the key, people, don't bring it up in the moment because it sounds like you're piling on. You want to he's in an emotional space right now. He's still really angry at the brother. And underneath that anger is probably a lot of hurt and humiliation, which is understandable. So you tend to those feelings and you just say, yeah, I get it. You wait 15 minutes and then you bring up, and then you want to own your feelings. So husband of mine, I am worried that if you continue to be angry at my brother, which is totally justified, then it will jeopardize your employment opportunities for the future and our family's financial viability of the future, and just future conflicts with the family. And I would love it if you got along, at least to some extent, with my brother and the rest of my family. But it's your life, and I would understand if you don't want to get along with them. But I would love it if you did. And I have a lot of stress thinking about the fact that you are against my family and my family is against you. So it's owning your own feelings. You're not telling someone what to do. You're just telling someone where you're coming from, which is, there's no debate about that. And then from Andrei's position, he can be given the opportunity to step into the situation, to rise to the occasion and say, oh, that's understandable that my wife feels that way. Can I fix that? Well, I guess I could if I decided to bury the hatchet with Charlie. Instead, what Libby did is she crammed it all into one conversation, and she says, I agree with you about my brother. However, you need to make up with my brother. So it's, on the scale of things, not awful, but it's usually not as effective. But we'll see what Andrei says here. Maybe Andrei will interpret it in a charitable manner.
He's like you, babe. He doesn't like to apologize.
He's not, don't compare me with him.
I'm saying, like,
I'm not
he
even
doesn't,
close to his...
He's not a person that apologizes, and he hasn't done it yet, so, like...
He's gonna have to figure it out. He can come face to face and say, Betty, like, I'm sorry. I had too much alcohol, I'm a pig. Like, I didn't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, so Libby is accurate, in my view, to compare the two of them, Andrei and Charlie, in that they both abhor to apologize. They both want the other to come groveling on their knees, begging for forgiveness. The two of them, as I have been hypothesizing, Charlie and Andrei, both have traumas around humiliation and inferiority, which is why they have been overcompensating in all likelihood for these traumas. I don't know if they exist, but there's red flags of it. They've been overcompensating for that inferiority by dominating and by wanting other people to be subservient to them. When you are terrified of being dominated, one of the coping styles available to you is to constantly assert that you are always dominant over everyone else.
That is the first step. Because after the wedding, all of that got swept under the rug, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to communicate with each other, because I'm not living in strife. We have to meet with him. We have to get together with him.
So this is a continuation of the, at least somewhat problematic approach that Libby is taking. Instead of owning your feelings and communicating that, she is just demanding that he do something, which I don't think goes over well with him. Instead of saying, okay, honey, I get it, but I'm just going to tell you where I'm coming from. And a lot of people have a problem with this, by the way. Honey, I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from. I am really worried that the two of you are going to be constantly at each other's throats. And guess what that's going to result in? Well, Charlie's not going to get fired by my dad. You're going to get fired by my dad. And then where are we going to be? You want to work for my dad. You want to work with him. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And I'm really worried that if you don't get along with Charlie, things aren't going to work out. And Charlie's not going to apologize. I don't think so. And you're right, he should apologize, but I don't think he's going to. And, it's up to you, honey. It's your life, but it's our financial life. And it would really mean a lot to me if you were to be the bigger man and try to make right with him. I'm not saying you have to grovel. I'm not saying you have to admit you're wrong. I'm just saying, can you just try to get along with him somehow? Okay, so something along those lines. That's owning your feelings. It's making a request instead of just barking at him and saying, you have to do this, you have to do that.
We have to meet with him.
Oh, I agree. Believe me, I agree. I'm willing to meet up with him, and I'm willing to listen to him.
Okay.
But he has to apologize. How he acted like a pig at the wedding. Or otherwise, we are not going to work together.
So this is just... Now, I get where Libby's coming from. I mean, you just see the gears turning in her head. She's like, my brother's never going to do that. And what did you just say? I mean, Andrei just said, I'm not going to work with him. How is it that you are in control of that? You're literally working for a man whose son is Charlie, who works for the business. So you're going to demand, you're going to ask for a loan for $100,000, and then you're just going to say, I'm going to demand how I'm going to be employed. It's like your very first job and you're 16 years old and you're working at McDonald's and you're saying, I'm going to be the manager. I'm not doing the cashier or the grill. That's just not going to happen. I mean, it's just interesting the way that Andrei thinks. He's an interesting one because it's easy to just sort of look at the surface behavior of the belligerence and the, traditional gender roles. It's very noticeable. But I think there's something very interesting about his traumas that cause him to behave strangely, is the way I'll put it for now.
I really think that Charlie should cut his and not talk to us, because this time I'm not gonna take it. It's gonna be a very, very rough conversation or something else if he's gonna start acting like how he did at my wedding in Moldova.
So this is an example of undifferentiation. You'll hear me talk about Murray Bowen's theory, which is very useful not only in individuals but also in family systems. You'll hear me talk about triangulation and whatnot, but one of the examples here is that we all know, I'm pretty sure, that for Andrei, his mission, his goal in life is to gain employment with the father. Gain employment anywhere, but apparently he's having troubles, and so he sees a fast track to financial success through the father, which is probably correct. And he wants to work for the father, so that's his that's his long-term goal. He might, like 5-10 years down the line, have an idea of like, well, I'm going to branch off on my own, but for now I need to please the father. I need to work with him. So that's a major goal in his life. He also wants to have a good marriage. He also wants to be able to provide for his family. Maybe there's other kids on the horizon, that kind of thing. So these are his big goals. But right in front of his face is the prospect of having to swallow his pride and deal with Charlie. And he can't, his emotional reactivity, which is hurt, I'm guessing, and humiliation, is eclipsing his ability to keep his eye on the ball, to keep his eye on the bigger goals in life. And this is what we call fusion or undifferentiation, is the inability to sift through those different aspects. On one hand, you have this voice in your head that is saying, don't give in to Charlie. Charlie's a big jerk face. He hurts your feelings. Push him away from you. On the other side is, if I'm going to make this work, I have to get along with him, because I don't think there's any other way around that. So what do I do with this? Well, undifferentiated means you can't differentiate between those two things, and they all become jumbled up, and you end up doing things that are very counter to your goals repeatedly. And people usually become undifferentiated because of the way they were raised in families where there was a lot of undifferentiation. Now, we've seen in previous seasons, maybe this season, I can't remember. I'm having a hard time differentiating between the seasons, that the family seemed quite lovely, but we can't just go off of that and assume that things were always awesome for Andrei. All right, well, that does it for that episode. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, you can do so now by using the link below. That's how we know you like what we are doing. If you ever want to express your gratitude and you can't afford it, then becoming a patron is the best way to do that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.